Can you hear me? on behalf of the Roseville Strings, I'd like to welcome you to today's concert. As you've seen in the program, this concert is dedicated to the memory of Glenda Pooley. Glenda was a founding member of the Roseville Strings, and she was a very faithful member of the first violin section. For most of my years with the orchestra, Glenda was my stand partner, and she was a wonderful stand partner. Today's concert would have been only the second concert that Glenda had to miss in our 26 years as an orchestra. Glenda's family is here today, including her 3 grandkids, who are all taking music lessons thanks to Glenda. She would be so proud that her passion for music is being passed down to the next generation. So thanks to the Pooleys and to everyone for being here today, and enjoy the concert.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. Good to see you all here. Today's concert is called Dancing with the Strings. And not everything, but most of the music that we're playing today is, in fact, dance music or inspired by dance music. And I'll tell you a little bit about all the pieces as we're about to play each one. These Bartók Romanian folk dances with which we begin, you may well have heard them yourself. They exist in various forms for various instrumentations. You may have played them. Bartók, who lived back in the late 19th century and well into the 20th century, he himself was a Hungarian and a great lover of music in general, an excellent pianist, and very interested in folk music. And in the early days of the 20th century, he went out with these, by modern standards, extremely primitive recording devices. And he would go out into the kind of, small backwoods, very remote villages in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, recording folk music, both just out of a natural interest in it and perhaps also, just sensing the approach of the modern age, wanting to preserve it before it got lost. And in fact, you can find online, if you go on YouTube, for instance, you can find these original recordings that he made that are the inspiration for these Romanian folk dances we're about to play. They sound incredibly scratchy and all of that, but it's really fascinating to hear them as they were originally done, which is very different from this kind of modern, refined concert approach. You can also find online, by the way, Bartók himself playing the pieces on piano. And again, the approach is different, and every time it's reorchestrated for a different ensemble, it's different as well. But it's a wonderful variety of folk tunes. Several of them feature Emily on violin, kind of a dialogue between her and the rest of the orchestra. Several involve the full orchestra. The last 3 are played more or less without pause. And in fact, in some editions, it looks as if this piece has 6 movements. In our edition, it's marked as 7 movements. So if you're trying to follow along in the program, you may find yourself scratching your head by the end saying, wait, did we just go into a new movement, or is this still the last one? It just goes from one fast dance into another. Regardless, we hope you enjoy. And when you think it's time to applaud at the end, please feel free to do so. Okay, a few words about the Boyce Symphony we're about to play. This one, in addition to our normal string retinue, includes harpsichord as well. You can see Priscilla coming on. Boyce lived in that kind of transitional time in the 18th century where we're not quite out of what's considered the Baroque area yet. We're not quite into the high classical. We're somewhere in between. You'll hear this music is not, say, as contrapuntal as, for instance, that of Bach, but it definitely does still have that Baroque practice of using the harpsichord. The movements, also, they all, I think, have kind of a dance inspiration to them, but in each case, maybe he's taking the music and elevating a little bit to where it's got more of that symphonic feel. The first one, some kind of like country folk dance or perhaps a processional. And it was actually, I didn't discover this until yesterday, the first movement was used as part of the recessional music at the wedding some years back of Harry and Meghan over in England. The second movement, you can hear, is clearly inspired by minuet. It's in triple time, but it's marked in 3/8 as opposed to 3/4 time, which is the traditional marking for a minuet. So again, going somehow in a different direction. And the last movement, perhaps something like a kind of a country jig. So, in 3 movements, Symphony by William Boyce. Yeah, so we have some reseating going on. Let me explain about that. Percy Granger, who, kind of like I mentioned about the Bartok before, that those Romanian folk dances have been written for all kinds of instrumental combinations. Percy Granger would do the same thing with his music. He would write it for whatever kind of combination of instruments he darn well felt like. And in this case, you'll hear in this piece there are 3 distinct violin sections as opposed to the traditional 2. So that's what's going on here. They're getting reseated for that. And you'll hear the melody go around between the different violin sections, violas, cellos, everyone has fun along the way. Another thing that Granger has in common with Bartok is that he also was an avid collector of folk music. Granger himself was a native of Melbourne, Australia. If you've ever been to Melbourne, I haven't, but if you ever have, one of the bridges downtown, over the main river downtown, was actually designed by his father. His father was an architect. He eventually moved to England, spent a long time there, and then in his later years to the United States, was active at the Interlochen National Music Camp, and he died in White Plains, New York in the early 1960s. Mock Morris, while inspired by folk music that he had collected, is itself actually an original Granger tune. There's other things that he did which he took from other sources, but Mock Morris is actually one of his own, inspired by Morris dance music. And if you've ever seen Morris dancers, they have bells on their costumes, and so it's a very visual thing, and it's a very, I don't know, noisy thing. I don't mean noisy in the bad sense, but just there's a lot of sound involved as well. And there's a lot of rhythm, and there's a lot of movement, and a lot of sound in this. So this is his take on a Morris dance, thus the term Mock Morris. And enjoy watching it go around between the 3 different violin sections as well as the different parts of the orchestra. Okay, now on to the Elegy of Gabriel Fauré. This was originally intended for use as part of a cello sonata. It was to be the slow movement of a larger work for cello and piano. And in its original version was written for cello and piano and premiered that way as just that solo movement. People would do that sometimes, you know, just premiere a particular movement before premiering the whole piece. And it was very successful on its own. And ultimately, Fauré just left it at that. He never composed the rest of the sonata. However, he did receive a request to orchestrate it, originally for full orchestra, not for string orchestra like you see here, but for full orchestra. Pablo Casals actually played the first performance of it that way. And again, it exists in several versions today, including this one for string orchestra. You've seen a fair amount of moving around on the stage already. You notice that we don't even always have the same people playing principal on every piece, because our philosophy here is really one that everyone has something to contribute to the group, and we're trying to develop musical leadership skills and a sense of investment and ownership, every single person in the orchestra. And while we sometimes have guest soloists come in, we also do feature soloists from within the orchestra. So when Uli suggested to me, I think it was sometime last summer or last spring, he said, can we do this Fauré Requiem? I said, yes, absolutely, it's a gorgeous piece. I've gotten to accompany cellists on it before playing the piano part, but this is my first time doing the string part. And it's an absolutely gorgeous setting, and we hope you enjoy it. One more reset. So Norman Layden was a wonderful American composer who knew the greats of the big band era and lived all the way into the 21st century. And this wonderful four-movement serenade, again, has several movements inspired by dance. The first two are really more kind of classical in nature, and he even throws in a fugue there in the second movement just to show that he's got those kinds of classical compositional chops. The third movement, the nocturne, is kind of a lovely quasi-waltz featuring Wendy on the violin, but it's not exactly a waltz because instead of 3 beats or 6 beats, it's got 5. So it's just got that little slight edge to it. And if you know the last symphony, the Sixth Symphony of Tchaikovsky, that also has a waltz in 5/4 time in it. So who knows, perhaps he was inspired by that. And then the last movement is a cakewalk. Now, what is a cakewalk? Raise your hand if you know what a cakewalk is. A few people, okay. So a cakewalk has an interesting origin. It started out as a kind of a parody dance. It's believed to have started in the slave populations in the Old South, where they were making fun of the supposedly more refined dances that their owners, that their masters were doing. And so they had kind of these kind of humorous or exaggerated or silly notions, but this cakewalk became a thing of its own, and they would hold contests for who could do the most entertaining walk. The contests sometimes being judged by the very people who owned them and who were being mocked without them even realizing it. And the reward for whoever did the best walk was a cake, thus the name. And it became very popular along with ragtime right around the turn of the 20th century. And you can even hear it in the music of Debussy. And I'll just show you the kind of essential rhythm that cakewalks are based off of. Da, 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 da. Can you all do that? I'll do it one more time. Da, 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 da. See, if you can do that, you can play a cakewalk. Very good. So, 4 movements ending with this very lively cakewalk. Thank you for joining us tonight, this afternoon. Feels like tonight. I know, time change. Norman Layden Serenade.
permission, we'd like to do one more. Well, you're just going to have to stick it out. You may know this as the hoedown from Copeland's Ballet Rodeo. You may know this if you're of a certain television viewing age as Beef It's What's for Dinner.